Hi everybody, this is Mrs. Wilson and today we're going to be comparing colonial regions. Our learned is I can compare the New England, Middle, and Southern colonies by highlighting characteristics of each on colonial regions charts. Actually, I've already done the highlighting for you. Our students on site will be highlighting and adding information, but I've done that already for you and uploaded those charts into today's folder. We will also try to answer the question, how did the British colonies lay the foundation of our modern economic system? Very quickly reviewing vocabulary, cash crops are grown to sell rather than to be used just by the grower, and you labeled a number of those last week on the 13 colonies chart. The free enterprise system, which we'll be focusing on primarily today, is an economic system in which people are free to start their own businesses or do whatever they want. Indentured servant is a person who agrees to work for a set period of time without pay in exchange for necessities such as transportation, food, clothing, and shelter. Indentured servants were servants that made up a large part of the labor force early in colonial history, because a lot of people that wanted to come to the New World couldn't afford the cost that it took to pay for a ship, the passage on a ship, and so therefore they paid with their labor of 7 years. And if they survived that servitude after 7 years, they were given their freedom. A monarch is a ruler, and not a measuring device, by the way, but a type of leader, specifically a king or a queen. Number 5, profit, the money a business earns after all its expenses are paid. And 6, slavery, the practice of owning and controlling people against their will. And this will be the labor system that replaces indentured servitude as the cash crop industry or plantation agriculture becomes much more profitable, especially in the southern states. These are the charts that I uploaded that have already been highlighted with notes added to them. Of course, you can download them, print them off, and add more of your own notes, but these are the ones that I will be going through. I said earlier, free enterprise is the system that we're going to be, is really the word that we're going to be, or the vocabulary we're going to be focusing on the most in this section, especially since the colonies existed really for the sole purpose of Great Britain, to provide raw materials, resources to the British Crown. The British Crown needed those colonies, needed all the natural resources they had, because they were their own their own economy was suffering. Their own way that they made money was suffering. Years of wars and other things had depleted their resources. Overpopulation eventually, because the population of Europe grows pretty big as a result of the Columbian Exchange, and more people will need to find work and need to find more opportunities that really arrive in the form of the 13 colonies. The 13 colonies will be a place that gives many people, whether they're coming there for God, gold, or religion, the opportunity to become what they want to become. And Great Britain benefits from that. They profit from that. They profit from the cash crops that are grown in the southern colonies. They profit from the timber that is cut down in the forests of the New England and middle colonies and sent back to Great Britain. They profit from the fishing and the whaling and everything else that's going on especially up the coast of the New England and middle colonies. They profit from all of that. And initially they have incredibly strict trade regulations on the colonies, saying that they can only trade with Great Britain and no other countries. But in reality, when you are separated by a huge ocean, several thousand miles wide, it's very difficult to enforce any laws on a continent that is that far away. And so, yes, there were trade laws on the books that the colonies were supposed to follow, but in reality they didn't. As long as Great Britain was making money And as long as the colonists were loyal to Great Britain, they kind of looked the other way as the colonies not only traded up and down the coast among themselves, but also across the ocean with France and Portugal and other countries that wanted access to the products that they were able to harvest from the colonies. So comparing colonies, we're going to look at reasons for founding first and only look at 2 colonies per region. So we're not looking at all 13 colonies, but just some colonies that represent those regions. The Puritans founded another colony in Massachusetts 10 years after the Pilgrims landed in 1620. In 1630, the Puritans landed. This was a religious group that was at odds with the Church of England because they thought the Church of England was becoming too similar to the Roman Catholic Church. And as such, they decided to begin their own colony in the New World. And under the leadership of John Winthrop, they created the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and a very strict colony that didn't allow for people of other faiths to live there. And those that challenged John Winthrop and other Puritan leaders were banished from the colony. They were thrown off. So Roger Williams was one of those people that challenged the teachings of the religious leaders, along with Anne Hutchinson, who also challenged a religious leader, and both were kicked out. And it was very unusual for a woman to even become that active or that vocal in that day and age. Women simply, women were to be seen, not heard. And so for her to speak up vocally against the Puritan leaders was pretty significant. So Roger Williams leaves, Anne Hutchinson leaves, and Roger Williams begins a new colony in Providence. In Rhode Island, or rather creates the colony of Rhode Island, so that people that wanted to practice different religions could do so safely in their colony. Just a note here about free enterprise to kind of repeat what I said earlier. The colonists all up and down the coast were allowed to trade very freely among themselves, even though British laws said they couldn't, and that they couldn't trade with other countries. They did it anyway, and this allowed them to become incredibly profitable. Great Britain made a lot of money. The colonies made a lot of money. For all practical purposes, there was not a lot of poverty to speak of in these colonies. In fact, if anything, there was a growing middle class, that group of people between the poor and the rich, but a growing middle class that not only was able to survive and pay their bills, pay their rent, but also to take any profit that they had either from whatever their business was, whether it was lumbering or if they were merchants or farmers or whatever, and invest that money maybe back in their business, maybe expand their business, hire workers, whatever it was. If you're a farmer, maybe buy more land or buy different crops to grow. So they had even the colonists were making a profit that they could survive off of and become very comfortable living in this new world that was truly in a world of opportunity and abundance for the settlers that came. Let's see. All right, so moving on to the next part, geography. I'm just going to go very quickly through this. Geography of Massachusetts: large forests, clean water, cold, harsh winters, rocky soil as a result of the Appalachian Mountains that spread through there. They made their money primarily from lumbering, fishing, and shipbuilding. And the government, only Puritan men could vote. Later on, only men who owned land could vote. So really, women, of course, in this day and age were never allowed to vote. And not all men could vote. So unless you owned land, for the most part, you really had no voice in government or in making laws. John Wise was a leader who opposed taxes in this colony and tried very hard to improve the government in Massachusetts. In Rhode Island, they had very swift, very fast rivers, good soil, and harsh winters. Did a lot of fur trapping, especially beaver fur, and lumbering. And again, like Massachusetts, only men with property could vote. In the middle colonies, and again, we're going to just focus on two, looking at New York and Pennsylvania. New York originally is founded by the Dutch, and as a colony set up as fur trading posts. They were there for the abundance of, and in particular, beaver fur. And so they were there to establish fur trading posts. Eventually, this colony is taken over by the British, and it is it's no longer called New Amsterdam as it was under the Dutch, but it will be called New York. And this is going to allow New Englanders to actually move further west once once Great Britain captures and takes over the Dutch colony. Another colony in the middle area, in the middle region, Pennsylvania, was followed by a gentleman named William Penn. And here you can see here where the name Pennsylvania comes from. This was a colony, again, founded for religious purposes, a colony of Quakers who were incredibly peaceful, nonviolent organization of religious believers that that welcomed anybody and everybody. Whether they were people of different faiths or Native Americans. They were incredibly tolerant, probably among the most tolerant of the colonies during this day and age. The geography in this area, they had a lot of good harbors, river valleys, iron, cold winters, and hot and humid summers. Waterways were used for transportation, for food, all sorts of things. So those waterways, those swift rivers that we talked about in Rhode Island and so forth, will be incredibly important later on for establishing factories when we get to that part in U.S. history. There was some farming, mining, and lumbering. And only government-appointed governors appointed by the British King. So nobody elected locally in that area, but rather somebody that the British King handpicks and places in that colony. In Pennsylvania, again, rich forests. Soil, minerals, coal, river valleys, and so forth, a little bit of farming and lumbering. And again, the British King appoints a governor, and only male property owners were able to vote. In the southern colonies, Maryland and Georgia represent this region that we're looking at. This is a colony created just for Catholics, or created for Catholics as a safe place. Catholics were persecuted in Europe, and so this is one that's created especially with Catholics in mind. In Georgia was created as a penal colony or a prison colony. It was used as kind of a buffer zone between Spanish Florida, as you can see here, and the British colonies north of Georgia. So it was a British colony, and this is where Great Britain would send all of their prisoners when they wanted to empty out their prisons and stuff in Great Britain. They sent them to Georgia. Geography, this area had incredible farmland, easy access to sea in hot and steamy summers. This is where your cash crops will be grown: tobacco, rice, indigo. And later on, of course, cotton as that's introduced into the southern colonies. There was small farming in the southern colonies, lumbering, shipping, and fishing. At first, as far as government is concerned, the governor made all the decisions, but later on, white male property owners could vote for assembly members. In Georgia, they had a lot of swamplands, forests, mild winters, and hot summers. Again, this is perfect area for for farming and plantation agriculture, which we'll talk about again later um, as we go further down the road with U.S. history. And it is the only colony that is